Throughout my entire life, I've faced discrimination because of my sister, who was always the golden child in our family. On my wedding day, I finally got my sweet revenge. Growing up, my parents never hid their favoritism towards her. If she accused me of something, they'd believe her without question, often punishing me harshly. However, if I ever accused her, even with undeniable proof, they'd minimize her actions and find reasons to scold me as well. Take my birthday cake, for example. It always had to be her favorite flavor, and my parents acted like they didn't know I disliked it. They consistently bought her more than me and took us to places she wanted, even when it was supposed to be about celebrating me. My sister was spoiled and used me as her punching bag. Initially, she ignored me, but as we hit our teenage years, her behavior worsened. She had no friends, and her demeanor became increasingly hostile and mean. Our parents constantly boasted about her achievements while highlighting my flaws as material for teasing. She knew I was being bullied at school, but instead of supporting me, she sided with the bullies, calling me names like ugly loser and hairy monkey, even encouraging them to physically harm me. During one particularly bad fight, she went so far as to tell me to kill myself. At that time, I was already struggling with my mental health, and hearing such hurtful words from my own sister was devastating. High school was especially tough. There was an incident where she tried to set my hair on fire. Astonishingly, our mother defended her, claiming it was just playful behavior between brothers. It wasn't until our father intervened, finally taking a stand, that things began to change. He made it clear that enough was enough and that David needed to start respecting me. This confrontation was a turning point, as David realized the gravity of his actions and began to distance himself from me. Despite his efforts to bully me verbally, the physical harm stopped. However, his behavior continued to deteriorate as he grew older, becoming angrier and more short-tempered each year. Communication between us became strained, with him choosing to relay messages through our mother instead of talking directly. I longed to move out and escape the toxic environment, but repeatedly asked my mother to mediate a conversation, which she always refused. Determined to build a better life, I pursued my dream of attending university. Earning a scholarship as a top student, I moved away, finding solace and freedom in creating a life separate from the constant bullying and resentment at home. The first few months were liberating. I made new friends, enjoyed my classes, and felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. During my second year, I met Karen at a fraternity party through a friend, and we instantly connected. Coming from a religious background, having kids outside of marriage was frowned upon. However, when we discovered she was pregnant in our final year, we decided to marry right after graduation. Our wedding was a small, joyful ceremony with our parents' support, and for a while, everything seemed perfect. I believed Karen was the love of my life, someone I could build a monogamous, stable relationship with. However, our marriage soon faced severe challenges. I uncovered 2 incidents of infidelity: an intermittent affair with her married coworker, and a brief fling with an ex-boyfriend during a family visit. Each revelation felt like a knife to the heart. I chose to forgive her because I wanted to provide a stable environment for our child, but the damage to our trust was irreparable. 3 months ago, everything came crashing down again when Karen revealed that she had been having a long-term affair and suggested that our son might not be mine. The shock and disbelief were overwhelming. She couldn't provide proof of paternity, but after persistent questioning, it was confirmed that David was indeed the father of our child. This revelation was more painful than I could have imagined. Not only was my marriage falling apart, but the betrayal now extended to my own family. Determined to confront David, I reached out to him. Initially, he vehemently denied the affair, refusing to accept any responsibility. However, when I told him that Karen had admitted to everything, he started blaming her, calling her characterless. He claimed it wasn't his fault if women were attracted to him and that he was the better-looking brother. I firmly told him that I would expose him to everyone. When David mocked me, saying no one would believe me because he was the golden child, I scoffed at his arrogance and thanked him for confirming the truth. Knowing our parents had heard everything, David went quiet and then stammered, trying to justify his actions and salvage his image. Our mother, still in shock, demanded an explanation from David. He stuttered through a feeble attempt to blame everyone else but himself, desperately trying to shift the blame onto Karen. I could see my mother, who had once been protective of her favored son, now felt a mix of disappointment and anger. In that charged moment, I felt a strange sense of vindication. For years, I had endured David's torment, and now the truth was finally out. The roles were reversed. David stood exposed, his actions laid bare for everyone to see. As David's words faltered, my father, usually reserved in his expressions, couldn't contain his disappointment. He handed me the phone and began to speak to David. "David," my father began, his voice laden with disappointment. "What you've done isn't just a betrayal of your brother, but a betrayal of this family. You slept with your brother's wife and continued the affair even after they were married. Your actions have severe consequences and have irreversibly shattered the trust we had in you. I raised both of you to value family, loyalty, and decency. What you've shown today defies everything I've tried to teach you." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink into David's conscience. "Your disregard for your brother's feelings and the lack of respect for his marriage are unacceptable. You've not only hurt him, but also torn apart the bonds that hold our family together. Your mother and I are partly to blame for what you've become, but we will no longer tolerate this behavior. From today, you're cut off from the college funds I set up for you. You'll have to figure out how to pay your university fees on your own. I will also stop funding your lifestyle. Do you think it makes you more of a man to sleep with married women? Let's see how you manage without my money." Throughout this, I maintained a composed demeanor, although I initially wanted to scream at David. Watching my dad punish him was the ultimate vindication. I had exposed his true nature, and it was clear he had underestimated the consequences of his actions. My mother, despite David's persistent protests, continued to justify him, but my father swiftly ended the call, shutting down David's attempts to explain away his actions. Afterward, my mom approached me and hugged me. It had been a long time since we shared such a moment, but in that embrace, there was an unspoken understanding and support amid the family turmoil. She apologized for not believing me all this time. My younger self could never have imagined this moment being vindicated and embraced by my mother. Following this, my dad helped me find a good lawyer to divorce Karen. She and her lawyer tried to fight dirty, asking for alimony since I earned more than her, but her affair played heavily in my favor. We also conducted a paternity test, and it was confirmed that David was indeed the father of the child. The news was incredibly painful, even worse than discovering Karen's infidelity. I was furious that the son I had loved and raised wasn't mine. However, I decided to stay strong. Karen begged me to continue visiting my son, arguing that he shouldn't be punished for the situation, but I couldn't bear to see him. He reminded me too much of David, and I hated it. After my divorce was finalized, I felt a sense of freedom wash over me as I moved into my own bachelor pad. It felt surreal to live alone since I had married so young and never really had the chance to experience independence. However, my naturally independent nature allowed me to quickly adapt to my new lifestyle, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. 2 weeks ago, my dad called to tell me he was considering changing his will because he didn't want to leave anything to David. My dad is incredibly stubborn, and once he decided to cut David out of his life, he stuck to it. David tried reaching out to our parents and even showed up at their doorstep, begging for forgiveness, but they refused to let him in. Even my mother, who usually gave in to David's tantrums, seemed done with him. It must have been hardest for her. David never texted me to apologize for what he had done, showing he didn't regret his actions. He was just upset about being cut off from our parents. Dad told me he planned to leave everything to me, ensuring David wouldn't contest it. Later, he would leave David only $1. My eyes widened in shock as my dad had worked hard his entire life, including his assets, retirement fund, and life insurance. The total came to nearly $2 million. The only condition in his will was that if my dad passed away before my mom, she would continue living in their house, even though ownership would transfer to me. I didn't mind this, as I wanted to care for my mom in her final days. Somehow, David found out about this and, unable to reach our parents, called me yesterday, trying to make amends. He explained how he was struggling with college, and that after Karen discovered the paternity of the child, she had been pestering him for child support. He said he had no money and was looking for part-time jobs, but couldn't find anything. He begged me to talk to our family to start fresh since he really needed my help. I laughed in his face and told him I was done with him. I reminded him that he should have thought about the consequences before sleeping with my wife and getting her pregnant. David argued that I was being unfair and that Karen was also to blame, to which I agreed. I reminded him that I had divorced her, making her his responsibility. Now, he shouldn't be calling me to complain about her or the child, since these were the consequences of his own actions. David started to raise his voice, but I interrupted, reminding him that he was no longer the favored child in the family, but the black sheep who had slept with his own brother's wife. At that moment, David began to cry, telling me how everyone, including our grandparents and relatives, had turned against him. While this was true, it was no longer my concern. I told him we were done and that he should never call me again, since I no longer considered him my brother. Since then, I've replayed the conversation in my mind. Despite my hatred for my brother, I had never heard him cry, at least not since we were kids. I won't lie, it did hurt me a bit to see him so helpless, but I guess I'm here to ask if I should talk to our parents about him, or if I would be seen as... Thank you all for watching and listening to my story. If you found it relatable or helpful, please give it a thumbs up and share it with others who might benefit from hearing about my experience. Remember, setting boundaries and prioritizing your well-being is crucial in overcoming personal challenges. Stay strong, and I'll see you in the next video.